In the year 1847, there ruled a king over the vast expanse from Murparvat to Parwansagar. Despite having all the riches, a loving wife, and children, the king could not find peace and tranquility in his life. He tried everything in his power to attain it, seeking solace in worship and following every directive that was imparted to him, but to no avail. His wife, who provided him with eternal happiness, could not fill the void within him. At his wit's end, the king consulted a priest who advised him to seek something that would provide him with inner peace. The king ventured alone into the jungle, where he heard a frightening voice. However, he persisted and felt an overwhelming love that he had never experienced before. He encountered a stone that moved him to tears, and he knew that he had found what he was searching for. When the villagers arrived, the king offered them anything they desired in return for the stone. However, one villager, who seemed possessed by a spirit, demanded that the king cede an amount of land equivalent to the extent of the spirit's voice reached. The king agreed to the demand, but he was warned that if he ever attempted to reclaim the land, the spirit would return and take back everything that was granted. The king brought the stone, known as Panjurli, to his home, and his life was transformed. Happiness and peace flowed into his life, but the story did not end there. In the year 1970, many years had passed, and the village was filled with peace and happiness. However, the greed of one of the king's grandsons led him to covet the land that was granted in exchange for the stone. He wished to sell the land for profit, but the spirit of Panjurli, still worshipped and revered, had other plans. Every year, the spirit possessed someone in the village and performed Bhootha Kola. One year, the king's grandson approached the possessed individual and demanded the land be returned to him. The spirit, speaking through the possessed, warned the grandson that if he persisted, he would meet his end. In a moment of disrespect, the grandson questioned whether the voice was that of a deity or a mere dancer. The spirit, known as Diva, replied that if it was a dancer, it would meet the grandson the following day. However, if it was a god, it would disappear. The next day, the spirit vanished into the jungle and was never seen again. The grandson, ignoring the warning, sought legal action to reclaim the land, but his efforts were in vain. He perished in court, spewing blood. After many years, the village was living in peace and prosperity. However, on this day, the village was preparing for a special event where various sports were played, including some cruel and unethical ones such as gambling, cockfighting, and bull racing. The fastest bull belonged to Shiva, the son of the dancer who had disappeared years ago. Despite his vices such as drinking and smoking, Shiva was a skilled fighter who invested in cockfighting and emerged victorious. Meanwhile, the landlord's son, who was a good man, sponsored the event with his black money, but his servant Sudhakar rigged the bull race to make the landlord's bull win. However, Shiva was unbeatable in wrestling, taking on 1,000 people at once, though his weakness was his mother, who would hit him with a slipper. Despite his relatable character, Shiva was a loafer who would do anything for his landlord, who gave him medals and drinks. However, Shiva's friendship with the landlord was tested when Officer Muralidhar, who had a grudge against Shiva, prohibited their illegal hunting of wild boars. Shiva, his friends, and an old man who was still roaming with children would hunt wild boars, but the devil boar that Shiva hunted haunted him in his dreams, causing him to fall ill with a fever. Despite this, Shiva sold the boar to the shady landlord. The local department has announced that they will be surveying the land of every villager, and preparations for this task are already underway by Muralidhar. However, the villagers are also getting ready for their traditional Kola celebration. In the past, Shiva's father used to organize the Kola, but due to Shiva's excessive drinking habits, his cousin Gurava has taken over. It is believed that during the Kola ceremony, the spirit of god Diva possesses individuals, but Shiva avoids participating because he cannot control his addiction. Leela, Shiva's childhood crush, returns to the village after completing her forest officer training. Despite being a good man, Shiva teases her, but his feelings for her remain. However, a conflict arises between Muralidhar and Shiva, as the former dislikes the use of fireworks during the Kola festival. Their enmity intensifies as Shiva's loyalty lies with the village and its traditions, while Muralidhar is committed to his job. Leela's father seeks Shiva's help to recommend her for a job, promising to give his daughter's hand in marriage as a reward. Shiva agrees, but when he learns that the job involves boundary marking to recover the land illegally occupied by villagers, he refuses to cooperate. He confronts Muralidhar and defends his village's right to their land, but the argument ends in violence, and Shiva is beaten and left crucified. In his anger, Shiva blames Leela for not disclosing the true nature of her job. The landlord and his lawyer made a promise that they would not let anyone's land go anywhere. However, the landlord had a condition before fulfilling his promise. He demanded sex from a woman in the village, who had agreed to his advances. They engaged in intercourse in the jungle, but Shiva heard voices from the forest and goes to investigate. But the sudden appearance of Daiva scares him. Filled with rage, Shiva wanted to make Muralidhar's life a living hell. He started cutting down 4 trees every day. One stormy night, while Shiva was cutting down a large elder tree, Sudhakar and Muralidhar, who were already drunk, drove by in their car. Unfortunately, the tree fell on their vehicle, causing their untimely deaths. With no other options, Shiva had to cross the river alone in the jungle, all while feeling like someone was following him. He eventually arrived at the place where his father had disappeared, but this turned out to be a dream. However, a sudden plot twist occurred. Muralidhar, who had been presumed dead, was actually alive and Shiva had been granted bail. Meanwhile, Leela brought food to Andrew, and Shiva was still angry with her. But when food and intimacy were offered to him, he was unable to resist, and they fell deeply in love. However, their happiness was short-lived as the treehouse that Shiva had were raided, and they were all arrested and thrown in jail. Shiva's cousin Gurwa warned the landlord that something ominous was looming, and he must take the necessary precautions. Gurwa urged the landlord to get Shiva out of jail and set things right. However, the landlord's offer to Gurwa of a vast land parcel didn't sway him. Gurwa's lifeless body was later found, and no one could identify who killed him. In jail, Shiva saw Daiva, who was grief-stricken, suggesting that something terrible was afoot. Meanwhile, the landlord arrived at Gurwa's funeral and blamed Muralidhar for his death. He asserted that Muralidhar was the one who obstructed the Kola celebrations and thus, their faith had been jeopardized. The news hit Shiva like a ton of bricks. Kola has been a part of his family's heritage for generations, and now, for the first time, god Daiva was killed. Muralidhar's superiors were growing anxious as the matter was getting out of hand. They warned that if the land wasn't declared a reserve forest, the situation would worsen. Muralidhar's plan was to declare the land a reserve forest and render all of the landlord's papers useless. However, the landlord got wind of this and was bewildered. He didn't understand how the land became registered under his name. The events unfolding in the village were shrouded in mystery, and tensions were running high. The villagers were on edge, unsure of what would happen next. Centuries ago, a king bestowed a large parcel of land to the villagers in recognition of their devotion to a sacred stone. However, when landlord's father asserted his rightful ownership over his land, he was brutally murdered. Seeking justice, landlord sought the aid of the Daiva dancer Gurava, but was rejected, leading to his vengeful act of killing him and displaying his body in front of the villagers. Driven by his desire to reclaim his family's lost land, the landlord seeks to manipulate Shiva for his own gain. The landlord convinces Shiva that Muralidhar is responsible for Gurwa's death, leading him to take revenge by killing the government officer, playing right into the landlord's hands. With his own ulterior motives, the landlord seeks to use Shiva as a pawn in his game, sacrificing him in order to gain control over the land. Before Shiva could reach Muralidhar's house, he encountered his uncle, the drug seller, who revealed that Gurwa went with the landlord and came back dead. This made Shiva realize that the landlord and his father were corrupt from the beginning, and that they would have to fight a war against them and wash their goons in the rain. The villagers were anxious as they feared losing their land. Muralidhar then spoke to them, revealing that he was on their side and that declaring the place a reserve forest would ensure that the land belonging to the villagers would be protected. However, the landlord arrived with his gang, leading to the climax of the story. The village was in chaos, with houses ablaze and gunfire ringing through the air. Amidst the violence, Abdul was setting off bombs, and it seemed as though the villagers were no match for their foes. Even Shiva, who had been struck on the head with a stone, was not safe from harm. But that stone was no ordinary stone, it was the divine Gulaga, and when it entered Shiva's body, he was transformed into a vessel of godly power. With the strength of god Daiva coursing through his veins, Shiva was able to fight back against their attackers, effortlessly dispatching them one by one. As Shiva ate his snacks, his rage and fury were evident, but he was also fulfilling a tradition that ran in his family. They were the closest to god Daiva, and when he was in their form, they became unstoppable. Ultimately, it was the landlord who suffered the most for his broken promises. Shiva took his revenge by cutting the peace-wearing man's neck, bringing peace to the village at last. With the land now in the hands of the villagers thanks to Muralidhar's efforts, Shiva thanked him for restoring what had been taken away by the landlord. In the end, Shiva followed in his father's footsteps, running off into the jungle where he encountered his father before disappearing into the unknown. This story teaches us the importance of keeping our promises. If we fail to do so, we will never find true peace and happiness in life. Did this film leave you on the edge of your seat, or were you yawning through the whole thing? Leave your review in the comments below and let us know what you thought. And if you enjoyed our movie recap, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling recaps in the future.